Hi, I'm Dennis Lyons, editor of the Daily Item, and we are here today with David Rowe, the Republican candidate for the 85th District special election that happens on August 20th. And welcome, David.
Thank you very much.
We will be asking you a series of questions that we also asked your opponent the other day, and there will be videos of both of these conversations available to our readers online throughout the election. For those who have not had a chance to hear your thoughts on the minimum wage. As you know, the Pennsylvania minimum wage is at the federal level at $7.25, has been that way since 2009, and you've made it clear that you oppose raising it. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index shows that prices have gone up 19.39% than they were in 2009. Is there any thought in your mind that perhaps tying the minimum wage to the Consumer Price Index so that the minimum wage earners would at least stay even might make some sense?
No, I think that the minimum wage is something that when you have the government dictating what businesses need to pay, it only ends up hurting businesses, especially small businesses. If you end up raising the minimum wage, even tying it to some sort of previous marker, that doesn't mean that the businesses will then also be able to keep up with those markers as well, especially if you mandate it on something like the federal level. The wages that we earn, we all obviously want wages to go up. But the way to do it is to get government out of the way, is to let businesses thrive, is to create competition, is to create a workforce that is so talented and in demand that wages have to go up organically. That's how they go up. As Bob Garrett pointed out the other day on WKOK, wages are outpacing the rate of inflation currently. And you can point to a number of factors, low unemployment rates, high economic growth, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a number of things. That is how you create a sustainable wage increase. When you mandate it from the top down, it only ends up hurting entrepreneurs and small businesses and inevitably causes job loss. So,
I mean, Ohio is at $8.55, Delaware is at $8.75. A lot of people talk about $15, and that seems like, oh my God, really? But, a lot of the surrounding towns, states rather, have, not much higher, but somewhat higher. And again, if you did 19% on our current one, it would be $8.63 an hour. So the fact that it is at a higher rate at virtually every surrounding state, that's not a concern for you?
No, not at all. So two things. First of all, when you look at the minimum wage is something that is earned by a very, very small population of the state. So it's being blown out of proportion as if it will affect most of Pennsylvania. It's not. The percentage is very small. Minimum wage is mostly earned by teenagers who are working those first jobs, those first employment experiences that are so formative for them. My first job, making $5 an hour working for a farmer, taught me so much, taught me a work ethic, taught me how to manage my money as a young person. Once we start raising the minimum wage, we're going to see those jobs drop off. You're going to see, everybody talks about McDonald's employees. If you go to a lot of McDonald's in some of these states, you don't see the employees anymore. You start to see the kiosks. You see the computers, and that's causing jobs to be lost in the areas where those businesses are. So if you start raising the minimum wage, even say, well, this state does it, that state does it, Pennsylvania already has a whole slew of economic challenges that a lot of other states around us don't face. When you compile Pennsylvania's tax burden, we outpace almost any state in the union, because you have to compare our corporate income tax rate to our individual tax rate, to the death tax, to our property taxes, to our realty transfer tax, to all these other taxes that are compiled. You add them all together, Pennsylvania's tax burden outpaces almost any other state.
Okay. Next topic. The statute of limitations regarding sexual abuse in Pennsylvania remains an ongoing battle and one that will come up again this session. What are your thoughts on removing the barriers to offer closure and compensation to sex abuse victims?
Justice needs to be served, and I think this is an issue that I'm really interested in learning more about. Somebody just brought it up to me just the other day, and it's something I'm investigating. I'd rather not take a formal position on it because I don't know a lot of the details on it, but it's something I'm looking forward to hearing a lot more about.
The House has already passed it, I believe, twice, and in fact, your predecessor, Fred Keller, voted for it both times. It's kind of been stalled in the Senate, but it's something that, we're a year now since the grand jury report came out, yes. And it feels like not a whole lot has been done as a result. There's no question it's going to come up again. Should you be in Harrisburg, it will be an issue on your table pretty quickly, I would think. Okay, Bill?
Coming off 3 mass shootings in a week, Governor Wolf wants to close loopholes on private sales. Any person right now can still buy assault rifle to commit a mass shooting in Pennsylvania without a background check. We do have some red flag laws that have been passed. There are some additional ones that are sort of on the table that haven't been passed. What sort of gun reform would you support down in Harrisburg?
First of all, it's important to look at a couple of statistics. So you referenced mass assault rifle mass shootings, but it's worth noting that over 50% of mass shootings have happened just with handguns. 13%, just 13%, I'll say that number again, of mass shootings have been done with the so-called assault rifles. So that's an important thing to point out. Second of all, the Second Amendment, as it was stated, is in place to deter what could be an out-of-control tyrannical government. So whenever we talk about gun reform, we have to be wary of what gun regulations, what are we going to be taking away from the citizens, from law-abiding citizens, that is going to leave them defenseless in the instance of an out-of-control government. You look at how the Revolutionary War started, right? They came for the guns, and that's how it all started. So being able to defend themselves, law-abiding citizens to be able to defend themselves, is the entire point of the Second Amendment. The couple of statistics to look at: once you start gun bans in general. You look at Australia, which was the poster child of gun violence reduction, up until a couple of years passed, and then the black market started to develop, and then there was money to be made on these banned guns, and now crime rates are going back up. And in New South Wales, they've gone up 4 times in the last. They've quadrupled in frequency over the last decade. So these efforts to curb gun violence by taking guns away from law-abiding citizens means that the only people left with guns are the criminals.
I don't think people want to take guns away from people. I think they want to take specific guns away from people.
It's a very slippery slope. Once you take away this set of guns, then what's wrong with this set of guns? And it's a gentle erosion of our Second Amendment rights.
What about making background checks more detailed?
So there's actually a 2-tiered background check system already in place. The federal government does a background check, and then in Pennsylvania there's a second background check. So those systems are already in place. The danger that comes from something like a gun registry or smart guns or all these other things out there is it leaves a trail to the point of where, heaven forbid, we got to the point where the government decided it wanted to come and take the guns, they would already know who has them.
That's an extreme. That's not going to happen.
They probably said that 200 years ago too, until they did.
So, Dave, you're against any form of background check?
I'm not against any form of background checks, especially I think criminal background checks are absolutely something we need to have. But the background checks very quickly turn into we're getting the registrations and the permits, and every time you give the government the opportunity to say, no, you can't have that, it's a dangerous slope to giving the government complete autonomy to say what they can and can't do.
What should be our reaction to the shootings that seem to be plaguing this country?
So first of all, it's worth noting that the press covers the mass shootings that happen. They are horrifying, they are sad, they are gut-wrenching, and every single one of them should not have happened. But what doesn't get enough press is the number of shooting events that are stopped by law-abiding, gun-carrying citizens. Those don't get nearly enough press, and if you go back and look at the number of times a mass shooting was stopped by a citizen or an off-duty cop or someone who was just exercising their Second Amendment right, the number of lives that have been saved because of the Second Amendment are astronomical.
But the one in El Paso was in Texas, where there are very free and open gun laws, and Walmart, which allows people to carry guns into the store. And all that being said, it still happened.
Absolutely. And the thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And so disarming the
electorate. There were probably lots of good guys with guns in that Walmart that day.
Disarming the electorate just leaves the law-abiding citizens defenseless, and the criminals are the only ones that have the guns. We need to also... We are a culture that tends to live, not all of us, but a culture that sort of cultivates a fear surrounding firearms, which has been a shift in our culture. There's a program out there that is being promoted, and by the National Rifle Association, don't kick me out, that would bring into classrooms a program that would teach kids about firearms, what to do if you find a firearm in your house, how to respond in a shooting situation, these sorts of things to teach kids. Well, guns are a factor of our culture. They are something that, the number of guns owned in America is such that statistically 1 in every 2 Americans has a gun. the education that needs to surround that to prevent accidents at home and accidental shootings and how to respond in the event, educating people around firearms, educating them how to properly use them, educating them how to respond in one of these terrible situations is the path forward. Trying to exercise any form of gun control is not sustainable and is just a slippery slope that leaves the law-abiding citizens defenseless.
All right, so red flag law is included.
Red flag laws, when due process is ignored, that's where the danger begins. So if you are guilty until proven innocent under a red flag law, you are upending the entire system of justice that this nation was founded on. So if someone is guilty of a criminal act and they are found guilty and they are tried and they were given their due process, in that case, then yes, they have forfeited their right to carry a firearm. But to have any sort of law that would say, well, maybe you'll do something, so you have lost your Second Amendment right, is unconstitutional in every regard.
Okay, David?
Okay, again, David, thanks for joining
Hey,
us
of course,
today. And we are going to change topics again, so we'll regroup here. Broadband internet service is critical to many aspects of people's lives, including businesses. The governor has proposed taxing natural gas drilling to pay for broadband access in Pennsylvania. Do you support that measure? And how can Pennsylvania fund this infrastructure upgrade if indeed the government should be involved in this project?
So as a Farm Bureau member, I was just having breakfast the other day with a lot of members of the farming community, a lot of prominent members, speaking with them on the issue of broadband and how helpful it becomes for these sort of smart technology, these precision farming aspects that are becoming more and more prevalent and allows our local farming community to stay competitive. And I think it's something that is fantastic and we need to promote it. However, I do not support an additional tax on the natural gas to pay for it. Pennsylvania does not have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Our spending over the last 10, 20 years has not increased linearly, it has increased exponentially. We had a $700 million windfall from the Trump tax cuts, and we should, in Pennsylvania alone, and we should take that and we should apply it to Pennsylvania. We should bring the federal level movement to the state level so that we can see that same sort of sustainable growth. We are the only state in the union that has an impact fee. Granted, we are the only state that doesn't have a severance tax, but because we do have an impact fee, adding a severance tax on top of that will chase even more of those natural gas industry providers out of the state. We are already starting to see a decline. Wells are being capped. Businesses are leaving the area from more economically business-friendly states, and that is we have to stem that loss. Adding a tax increase to pay for this or that or the other is not the solution. Pennsylvania has the revenue. What they need to address is the spending.
How would you address providing or making sure that everyone has broadband service then, if it's not through this means?
Broadband is, do you mean how to pay for it?
Yes.
How to pay for it. If you look at the budget for Pennsylvania, there's a number of, so first of all, I would start with regulatory reform, tax cuts initially. Start off there. Second of all, I would institute something, I would support the instituting of something called the Taxpayer Protection Act. The Taxpayer Protection Act ties increases in government spending to some sort of predetermined marker. If that's economic growth or if that's population, some sort of index that allows spending to be not cut, but limited to a responsible, sustainable level. So I would strongly support the Taxpayer Protection Act, and that would make sure that we are living within our means rather than having to come back to the taxpayers time and time again to take more money out of their pockets. You look at the amount of money that is spent by the state government of Pennsylvania on things like corporate welfare. The amount of money that was channeled to the horse racing industry alone is money that could be channeled into that broadband, over $200 million. The handouts, the failed business deal with Amazon that would have given them $6 billion in tax credits is just another one of those indicators where the state government has the money, but they're picking the winners and losers. They've created an unfair economic playing field, especially for businesses and entrepreneurs. And so if you eliminate a lot of those corporate welfares, if you balance the playing field, you'll find that the state has more than enough money to invest in these critical infrastructure projects that will have lasting economic benefit.
And you view those as a priority? Broadband?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
I just want to follow on that one quick. Excuse me. As a You'll be a freshman down there from a pretty rural area. How do you go down there as a newcomer and tout why broadband is important in a place like this when there's so much representation and so much money in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, and the T is sort of left out a lot?
You couldn't be more right. The T is definitely left out a lot. I believe that I've built a pretty good relationship already with a lot of the lawmakers in the surrounding areas. I've spent a lot of time with Senator Yaw. Lately, I just was at Senator Toomey's event at the Miller Center, spent time with Linda Culver and Kurt Masser and all the other local legislators, and that sort of building that coalition early on to have a larger impact in the Capitol is essential. Something I would definitely do is I would invite legislators from the southeast, southwest areas to simply come visit one of our farms, one of the farms where they see, oh, this is what you guys are doing. Oh, this is what broadband could do for you if you had access to it. Giving them a perspective of boots on the ground. I don't know if they'd come, but I'd invite them.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, we're going to change gears again.
Sure.
Your thoughts on medical marijuana? Yeah, okay.
Go ahead.
I just say it currently operates in Pennsylvania. Do you think enough people have access, and have we seen enough to warrant its success?
And are we speaking specifically medical marijuana?
Yes, medical marijuana.
Speaking with a number of medical providers, they have spoken to the benefits of medical marijuana as a prescription option, and so deferring to the medical community, I would support the use of medical marijuana when it is prescribed appropriately.
And the follow-up question is, would you support the legalization of recreational marijuana in Pennsylvania?
No.
Okay.
Is it something that at least ought to be looked at?
I would not support it. Given my current awareness of the situation, I would not support the legalization of recreational marijuana.
Okay, that's not what I asked. I asked it as something that should be looked at.
Sure, anything should be looked at, right? I mean, we should definitely always be educating ourselves. We should always be exploring. We should always be educating ourselves on issues before us. As it stands, I would not support it. Would I like to learn more about it? Absolutely.
Okay.
What have you heard from people in the 85th about that? Because the lieutenant governor had the tour, and it seemed most people were in support of it around the state. And what have you hearing from your constituents out there?
So I went to two of Lieutenant Governor Fetterman's events. I went to the one in Union County. I went to the one in Snyder County. And to me, it was not an overwhelming support. It was actually almost entirely the other way. The overwhelming response that I have gotten when speaking with the residents of the 85th District has been overwhelming opposition. I think that the overwhelming support probably comes from the Southeast and Southwest, and probably some transient college populations. But in my conversations with the long-term residents here, it's not something they want to see.
And one more last question on the drug issue. Is the state doing enough to combat opioids?
That's an excellent question. So there's two perspectives on the opioid crisis here, and I think we need to focus on prevention and treatment. Prevention and treatment, and both of those come down to enabling local providers to do what they do best. On the prevention side of things, I'll start there. We need to expand and streamline the usage of prescription drug monitoring programs. Prescription drug monitoring programs allow providers to, while they're in the room with the patient prescribing something to them, see the history of that, that patient's prescriptions, making sure that what they're prescribing them isn't going to be too much or not enough. A lot of the prescription drug monitoring programs are inefficient. They are not streamlined. And when we look at those pain points, if it takes you 15 to 17 clicks and you have to spend 4 minutes finding something on that program, the odds of that provider doing it for every single patient just becomes more and more difficult. So I would like to see a streamlining improvement on the prescription drug monitoring programs that enable providers to have that firsthand experience with their patients while they're there in the room with them. On the treatment side of things, the New England Journal of Medicine did an excellent study in the city of Baltimore that found that when opioid addiction is treated like a disease, the mortality rate, the overdose rate dropped by about 50%. A couple of ways that they approach that. First of all, the DEA, and this is a federal level issue, the DEA regulates the usage of medically assisted therapy, MAT drugs, like methadone, like buprenorphine, and requires doctors to have a special license before prescribing these. And I think that is something that is, again, limiting the use of these drugs that have proven to be effective in helping curb the addiction. So on the federal level, and this is something I meant to talk to Fred Keller about, seeing about either A, removing those DEA limitations that are years and years old, or providing funding or opportunities or credits for the hospitals, the providers, to seek out those licensures, those certifications as part of their continuing education. So a two-pronged approach of prevention and treating it as a disease, giving people the opportunity to come into their provider to work on that issue, I think is essential. And there's one second part of that, enabling providers to do what they do best, is something that they call a warm handoff, which is something that while in the office with the doctor, if there is an addiction situation, they can connect that patient immediately with a social worker right there in the room, rather than saying, okay, well, we'll call you in 2 weeks, which for a lot of people that might be too late. They can connect them with a social worker right then and there. Then that social worker can immediately take that case under control, can start to help that person escape from their addiction. And the limitations on that, a lot of that just simply comes down to funding or an awareness or an availability of those sort of social workers, of those providers. So prevention and treatment, two things, sum it up: expansion of PDM, prescription drug monitoring programs, and enabling providers to provide medically assisted therapy drugs like methadone, buprenorphine, those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Of course, that's the next question.
Okay, we'll jump to another subject.
Sure.
This one is the size of the legislature.
Absolutely.
And we all know it's one of the largest and well-paid legislatures. And there has been talk of reducing its size from 253 to something like 151.
Yep.
So you've been outspoken on that subject. Could you talk about it again?
Sure. So I'm a firm believer in limited government. As you are all well aware, the East Buffalo Township underwent a referendum on the idea of expanding the size of government. For that, it was the supervisory board moving from 3 to 5. I was vocally outspoken about that. I worked very hard to oppose that, and thankfully the voters of East Buffalo Township agreed with our message of limited government and voted down the expansion measure in a resounding 61 to 39 margin. So it was an overwhelming no from the taxpayers of East Buffalo Township to have a bigger, more expensive government. So I believe that same sort of conservative approach needs to be applied to the General Assembly. The one thing that I want to make sure happens as we look at the reduction of the legislature is that there is not a loss of representation and a loss of communication between constituents and representatives. Making sure our representatives are doing their job, right? We're paying them a full-time, as you said, a generous salary to be a representative. And if we're pursuing reducing the size of the legislature, that means that the representatives need to be doing their job. They need to be out there. They need to be putting in their 40 hours, if not more, a week, doing what they are being paid a full-time wage to do. And so reducing the legislature is something I support. Making sure that legislators are doing their full-time job, being a legislator, is absolutely something I support as well.
Because of the way the process works, obviously it has to be passed not only by both houses, but it has to be passed by both houses twice, right? My sense is, and this may be a cynical journalist talking here, but my sense is there's no great will to do this. Just in this past year, it got passed on one side and didn't get, it got changed enough that it wouldn't work.
Right.
So do you see that there's a will to do this?
I can't speak for anybody besides myself. I think my efforts on behalf of the taxpayers of East Buffalo Township shows that I'm willing to be tenacious about it. I fought very hard, spent a lot of time and effort and money on that campaign to educate voters on the excessive cost of additional supervisors for the township. So the will is there with me, as has been exemplified. I can't speak for my hopefully fellow legislators.
Okay, Bill?
Sort of follow up on that. I mean, why go after this seat then? There's a potential that the seat could not be there if they reduce it. You've got a seat on the board. You're a local business owner. Why is this something that you want to do?
So first of all, just to clarify, I did resign from the East Buffalo Township Board of Supervisors. I also removed my name from the ballot because I wanted to be, just like I was saying, I wanted to be a full-time candidate. I wanted to make sure I was putting the time in now so that I could be able to put the time in later. So I am campaigning 10, 12 hours a day. If it's meeting here with folks like you, if it's out knocking on doors, if it's at events, so that once the election is over, I can transition seamlessly into putting that same amount of time into serving as the representative. The reason I'm pursuing the seat is not because I'm looking for any sort of benefit. As I've mentioned on the radio, I'm not going to be taking the pension program that they offer. I don't think it's fair for our legislators to serve in a role and enjoy benefits that are not comparable to the private sector. And the pension that is currently offered to the legislators is not comparable to any private sector entity. So I will not be taking that pension because it's not on a level playing field. The reason I'm pursuing the seat is because the people of Union and Snyder counties deserve to have a representative that shares their values in Harrisburg. And I share the perspective of the people here of supporting our farming communities, of lower taxes and deregulations, allowing sustainable economic growth to create more family-sustaining jobs in the area. And that is a perspective that is shared with the vast majority of residents here, and that's why I'm running.
So following up on that, how does your experience as a business owner prepare you to do this job?
I think that the government needs to be run more like a business, because if I ran my business the way the government was run, then I would have been bankrupt or put in jail already because of the massive debt I would have accrued. You know, the Pennsylvania, between state and local governments, owe over $127 billion in combined debt. That is not a sustainable situation for any entity to be in, but for the government, they get away with that. That is leading to, we look on the federal level, the skyrocketing debt, and Pennsylvania is just following that same pattern. We are passing along unsustainable debts to the next generation. So, restate your question.
Well, basically, how did your experience as a business owner prepare you to do this job?
Yeah, looking at what you have and living within your means is something that every business owner has to do. Learning how to manage your money, learning how to manage your staff, learning how to reinvest in the things that are going to be sustainable, long-lasting, and profitable, and learning how to cut off the things that are dead weight, that are either harming or outdated. So being an employer, being a business owner, somebody who has had to manage money, someone who has had to put up with the regulatory nonsense that really hinders economic growth on a day-to-day basis, has put me in a perspective to go in there and speak on behalf of the small businesses that are the bedrock and the foundation of our economy, and also to be able to have the financial perspective of the people that are paying taxes, of the people that are knowing how to manage their money, and bringing that perspective to Harrisburg. When we look at the regulations that limit business growth, it's no wonder that Pennsylvania continues to fall behind in economic growth beyond almost every other state. We haven't followed what the federal government has done, and we need to be doing that. For my business, when I wanted to, I was expanding my business for the third time. We were moving to our third larger location, and I needed to get a permit and pay a fee. And then I wanted to put a sign on the front of my building showing what my business was. Had to get a permit and pay a fee. And then the pylon sign along Route 15, I wasn't reconstructing it, wasn't rebuilding it, just wanted to put a new sticker on there because I don't own a car store. And in order to do that, I had to get a permit and pay a fee. And these piles of regulations and permitting and fees, they're just another layer of indirect taxation on our entrepreneurs. So trying to build a business, trying to get off the ground, and realizing, I also have to budget a couple $100 or couple $1,000 just to pay the fees to actually just open my business in the first place, is stifling the entrepreneurial spirit that is foundational. One thing that the governor has actually spoken in favor of, surprisingly, that I would be very happy to see, is the removal of several licenses that are currently required by the state of Pennsylvania just to exist. So if any of you have daughters, anybody have a daughter? Right. So if your daughter wants to start a little business braiding hair, she has to get a license from the state to do that. If somebody wants to, rent out campgrounds, they have to get a license to do that. If somebody wants to be an auctioneer, you have to get a license to do that. Now, certain regulations are in place for the protection of the consumer. You don't want somebody deciding, hey, I'm going to do heart surgery today. I think that's what we'll do. That's obviously an industry where you want to be able to have that oversight. But when we're talking about somebody who just wants to be an auctioneer, or somebody who wants to manage properties or be a barber, and they have to go through a costly and long-term process just to get a permit, just to get their license, why would they bother doing that? Why would they bother doing that here? I was just talking to somebody at the Middleburg Fair last night, and they were mentioning that they had tried to open an ice cream shop 5 or 6 months ago, and the process was still ongoing. An ice cream shop, and it's taken them 6 months to get to the point where they can open their doors. That's the sort of stifling regulation that is killing entrepreneurship in Pennsylvania.
All right, you sound very passionate about your business, and yet now you're going to walk away from that business. One of the key differences between you and your opponent are her expectation that she would continue, at least on a part-time basis, to provide the medical services that she now provides full-time. How does it work for you to just walk away from that business, and do you think it's essential that you walk away from that business?
I do, because I do think it's essential, because the taxpayers are paying me a full-time salary to do a full-time job. And so it is essential for me to do that. If I am not working full-time on behalf of the people, I am doing them a massive disservice. If I'm not available to take phone calls from them, to be in the office in Mifflinburg when they come to see me, to be in Harrisburg representing them, I am doing them a disservice. I spoke to a Democrat in Mifflinburg just the other day who said to me that they were voting for me because they wanted to know that I would be there when they needed me, which I will be. As in regards to stepping away from the business, I am very fortunate to have several very competent, very dedicated staff. Before this process started, we had a staff meeting. We talked about the potential of me to take time stepping away from it. They were all very supportive. They were very glad to take on the additional workload. I hired another employee to operate the business for me. The business has gotten to the point where it is self-sustaining, and that's the beauty of building a successful small business, is I can hire someone, step away, the business will operate just fine in my absence, so that I can do the new full-time job that the taxpayers will hopefully find fit for me to do.
Okay, I think we will leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you all
today.
very much for having me. I
All right,
appreciate it.
Good luck.
Thank you.